Thank you very much, Secretary Vilsack. We most appreciate your being with us and your always inspirational comments. We appreciate Administrator Shaw opening this morning and our keynoters, Dr. Gale and Ms. Lauren. Secretary Vilsack's leadership and Administrator Shaw's leadership have been critically important as we move forward with these issues, and I'm sure they will continue to be important as well. We'd also like to thank those who are the financial supporters of this organization and this event, and first and foremost, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who give us not only the ongoing financial support, but also the intellectual inspiration to proceed. We thank the sponsors who sponsored this event, particularly Abbott, DuPont, the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy, and Monsanto, and also those companies who supported the new program for next generation leaders who are here, Land O'Lakes and Novus. There are many partner organizations. We thank you all. And we thank all of the participants who have been here because you have added a lot to our meeting, those of you who have been here in the room, and those of you who are watching online, and all of those who participated by tweeting and blogging. And before I make a few closing summary comments, I have special thanks to the staff of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and I wondered if they would stand, if they're in the audience, and if they're backstage, if they would come on stage. But first and foremost, the woman who organized all of this and who made our thoughts into reality in terms of recruiting the speakers and putting them together and leading the way, and that's Lisa Ekman. Lisa, thank you very, very much. And Lisa's team includes, and please stand or come out, please, if you're here, Courtney Ahern, Marjorie Burdetsky, Matt Burdetsky, Emily Kutka, Anna Edwards, Melanie Hannon, Stephanie Hines, Ambreen Hussein, Chris Juby, Megan Keefe, Chelsea Kendall, Sung Lee, Rachel Levenberry, Trin Liu, Elizabeth Lula, Tria Raimundo, Sam Skinner, Kavita Sood, Laura Sosa, Fraser Turner, Sarah Warner, January Zell, Suzanne Pohl. Thank you all. Now they have a leader too. And their leader is Marshall Bhutan, the president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. This is not just a symposium that happened that's here for this time in this place. Especially for those of you who are new to this, you must know that it was Marshall's leadership at the Chicago Council that started attention being paid to agriculture at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs in 2005, when he said, gee, we are here in the middle of the Farm Belt, we are here with lots of agribusiness in Chicago, we should be paying attention to the upcoming Farm Bill. And he organized a group of experts and who put together a proposal for the Congress to think about what the Farm Bill maybe should be like. I liken that proposal, by the way, to a movie that the critics loved and to which no one bought tickets. But it was the first stab at putting together ideas, really a thoughtful intellectual piece about what should happen in U.S. farm policy. He's done it again in this Farm Bill discussion. There may be little pieces of the next round of the Chicago Council Farm Bill project. But it was because of that ultimately that the Chicago Council ended up working on this Global Agriculture Development Initiative. So it was Marshall's initial thought to get into agriculture, his leadership, and then his inspiration that really we had the capacity to take this on and to work to try to convince the U.S. government to prioritize agriculture development. So I don't think we could, even before I do the summary, we could possibly end this without giving a special appreciation to Marshall for his huge contribution and inspirational leadership. And then there is one more person, and I get to say this because I'm the closing speaker, Dan. And because Dan and I are a team for the last 5 years, and we knew each other from government before, but we've really had the wonderful opportunity to work together in a real partnership. And as you can see, many of you know Dan, those of you who saw him for the first time today can see that he is smart and pragmatic, that he has a wealth of experience, that he's kind, and that he's funny. But most of all, more important than all of the above, is he cares. And that makes all the difference. Thank you, Dan. So I get to close because Dan got to open and we're partners, so there were the bookends for you. And as I thought about what I might say tonight, or this afternoon, it's almost tonight, what a day. Incredible day of very rich discussions, incredibly thoughtful presentations, and people bringing reality to us, and not only in their enthusiasm, but sometimes in saying, well, wait a minute, don't get too carried away, and people bringing extremely creative solutions to the table. Now, we were at this symposium this year, as we have been for each of the 4 years, very international. But this is the first time that we've also been intergenerational. And I think because of the success of today, I don't think we will ever have a symposium again that is not both international and intergenerational. When we started this morning, Dan and I gave you pieces of what the report was that we've put together from the Council to present to the U.S. government and others. And as the course of the day went on, each one of those different proposals came up, but in very different ways, in very creative ways. For instance, we talked about research needs, and we heard some of the traditional, yes, we need to, as we said, yes, we need to put more money into research, yes, we need to double research, yes, USAID and the US government plans to do that. But we also heard a lot of non-traditional ideas about how research could be developed. And one of the reasons why we heard some of those non-traditional things is because we did another thing that we said we should do in this report, which is we said we should hear from experts in all scientific disciplines. So we did have our full complement, or a big complement, of agriculture specialists, agriculture scientists from all different areas here today, and we had nutritionists, as Ruth reminded us, and we had economists. Okay, all those people you might expect to be here. We had a cardiologist, a theoretical physicist, a complex system scientist, I didn't even know what that meant, and a NASA climate change scientist, and I may have missed some, but one of the reasons why we have so many different thoughtful ideas, especially about research, including the creation of meat, for instance, is that we had this wider array of thoughtful people coming to the stage. We said at the beginning that we were going to be talking about food security as national security, and we saw that in different ways as well from a variety of presentations. Why food security is important for the national security of the United States of America, and why it's very important in every country in the world and for every region in the world, and indeed for the whole world. And we saw and began to understand some data that prove that point. We've always talked about climate change, we mentioned it this morning, but today we understood more about what that really means and how climate change is really going to impact on different regions of the world, and how it's going to have a negative impact in many places, sometimes a positive impact, but how there's never going to be an end to it, and we have to figure out how to adapt to it using many different approaches. Reminded me of the time when in 2000, when I visited Kenya and I met with Dr. Richard Leakey, who at the time was a member of the president's cabinet in Kenya. And he had responsibility, cross-cutting responsibility to get things done then in the middle of the drought. And one thing he told me was that what we have to do in Africa is to think about droughts, for instance, as African winters. And I said, well, what does that mean, African winters? He said, well, we have them. And we have climate that changes. But you have that. In the north, you have snow. And you've figured out how to deal with snow, and you've figured out how to get through it, and you've figured out how to transport through it and how to live within it. And we have to find different ways in order to deal with our winters as well. And I was reminded of that today when we talk about climate change, though not quite the same thing as a drought that comes up every few years. It is part of that whole concept. And we have to all think about how to adapt. We said this morning that private sector leadership was important. And then today we heard from senior leaders in the private sector. We heard about their commitment and their innovation, their expansion, and some of the wonderful things that they're working on and might be thinking about doing around the world in the future. But we also heard from a social entrepreneur about how she was taking the opportunity, really, to bring anti-hunger issues to a much younger audience and people who care about these issues from a very different perspective. When we talked about trade, I was reminded of maybe it's American slang, it takes two to tango. Through Ann's panel, we learned that it might be, we already know, but they talked about how it might be challenging to get many more than two to the table. But there is movement on at least two here and two there and two there, and maybe all of those little dances will become something that's important in the long run. And when we talked about people, we talked about them from very different perspectives, but all coming back in the same place. We talked about farmers' needs and connecting research to them, translating science so it's understood by them, but also taking their issues to the scientists and their issues to those people who are trying to find solutions. When we talked about gender, we talked about it not only from a women's empowerment perspective, but also from the perspective of the decisions made in the household and who is the best decision maker in the household for the benefit of the family. We talked about the critical 1,000 days, we could never talk about that enough, and the role of mothers, both when they're carrying their children and, of course, when they're taking care of them, especially in the first 2 years of their lives, and how if we miss that window, that I think Dr. Garza said, that part of the loan agreement, we are never going to be able to make it up. And then we've talked about extension this morning. We talk about extension all the time, and usually the way we talk about extension is, oh, well, the old systems don't work, now what? But we saw some really fascinating concepts today, especially using social media for extension, and how incredible that is to be able to use social media to build role models, to share information. Oh, I can do that. Look what she's doing. I can do that too. And how we can rethink extension perhaps in totally different ways. We heard the highly successful examples of places like Brazil. We could probably spend hours more listening to that, but at least in the short, succinct points, we heard about some of the key ingredients that went into the Brazil success story that might be replicated in other places. And then the whole issue of building role models also includes building networks and using children to change familial, community, and national behaviors. We've seen that in history in different places, different times. But as was pointed out today, why not use it for the social good? And if you can do it in a country like China, we can do it in many other places as well. We have leaders here in the audience from FFA and from 4-H. They've been doing it in different ways in the agricultural communities in the US and elsewhere for many years. But again, thinking about a different mindset to reach young people was one of the strengths of today. And part of that was because of the power of youth, the innovative power of youth, the educational power of youth, and the borrow from Spike Lee, do the right thing, moral authority of youth. And that my last lesson that I learned today is that it's really important for us when we think as policymakers or talk to policymakers, to think about what the real message is, what the ultimate purpose is. Why are we here? Everybody's here because we care about agriculture. Everybody's here because we want to be more productive in agriculture. Everybody's here because we want to be able to support the needs of people around the world, their nutritional needs. But the key thing in the way that's going to help us direct all of this in the proper way is that we define what we want to achieve. And Dr. Garza did that when he said, agriculture doesn't exist for agriculture's sake alone, but for all of humanity. So how do we, as farmers, as scientists, as managers, as advocates, as students, how do we move ahead in defining what we want agriculture to be? Because that definition is what's going to change policy, and in fact, it's what is going to change the world. Thank you so much, and good luck as you continue to work to change the world.